Hello. I recently created 2 AI add-ons for Godot, and this video will cover how to use them, how they work, and how I made them. The add-ons are partially written in C++ via GDExtension for areas where performance was important. C++ code has been compiled for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. The first add-on is the behavior tree graph editor. In the demo, you spawn in red and blue NPCs. Both use similar behavior trees, but red NPCs will go to each point in order before randomizing the order again, and the blue NPCs pick a point at complete random. The nodes available for building your BT graph are the statement node, bool node, if node, sequencer node, action node, wait node, and comment node. The left panel has a list of variables, and the right panel has a list of signals. Variables can be integers, floats, or bools. Each BT graph can reference a GD script at the top of the BT graph editor panel and will look for functions and signals there. The wait node will wait for some time or wait for a signal from the GD script you selected, and the action node will call a function from the GD script you selected. Typically, behavior trees have a selector node as well. However, the reason I did not include them was because I figured you could get the same functionality using the if nodes and flipping the return condition of action nodes. There are no decorator nodes for the same reason. So really, behavior trees are somewhat simplified and not really trees per se. I believe you can still do all the same things though. The second add-on is the Star NavGrid add-on. In the demo, you have a crawling, flying, and walking NPC. You cannot really control anything, but it does show everything working. The NavGrid will generate a grid of points that can be navigated using Godot's A-Star 3D. You will drag a bounding box over the area you want to build the NavGrid. One of the more important options is the type of navigation option. The floor option means the top of surfaces will become navigable for standard walking NPCs like humans. All surfaces for crawling NPCs like spiders, for example. Empty spaces for flying or swimming NPCs like birds and fish or helicopters and submarines. To bake the NavGrid involves using Godot's physics server, so it may take some time to create. To save time, you can check the Save NavGrid checkbox, and this will save a NavGrid data resource file that you can load in later. At this point, I'm done talking about the add-on specifically, and I want to transition to talking about GDExtension and my experience with it. This project was the first time in a while I got to use C++, and I wanted to talk about what it was like using GDExtension. The basic setup, I think, is well covered in Godot's documentation and by YouTubers. Essentially, I'm on a Windows computer and I'm using VS Code as my code editor. I'm also using Visual Studio 2022 to compile C++, but you could use MinGW instead to keep everything open source. You need one of the two or you can't compile C++. I would recommend FinePoint CGI's video on GDExtension for all the steps that you need to do and what you need to download. I know different people have different opinions on how you should write C++. If you look at the Godot docs C++ usage guidelines, they'll give you some basic help on how to write your code. I ended up doing my own thing, making use of the standard library vector instead of Godot's vector, using new and delete instead of Godot's memnew and memdelete, using basic pointers instead of shared or unique pointers. This is not as memory safe, and I believe it did result in the game crash when I had memory errors. And when there is a memory error, there are no error messages. In the end, I kind of just powered through until things stopped crashing. Eventually I started using a debugger because I was getting annoyed with the crashing. Again, I would recommend FinePoint CGI's video, which covers setting up a debugger in VS Code if you're using VS Code. I eventually started using the Godot array in my C++ code. There was an instance where I was getting a weird error in which the game would just freeze, and switching to the Godot array seemed to fix it. I suspect it was a memory-related error. I would recommend getting comfortable using Godot's data structures since they are easier to work with. I think one of the more interesting memory errors I encountered was when implementing A-Star. The A-Star algorithm can be optimized using a priority queue, so I used the C++ standard library priority queue. At first I didn't override the comparison function, and I was getting random results from my getPointPath function every time. And the reason was because I was storing pointers to my NavGrid points in the priority queue, and the priority queue was sorting based on the integer value of the memory location of the pointer, so it was completely random each time. On a side note, I did somewhat struggle figuring out how to do basic Godot things in C++, so I think the behavior tree interpreter code does a good job at demonstrating how to create a callable, connect a callable to a signal, and how to emit a signal in C++. To make this add-on available for Mac and Linux, I set up Docker containers for building on those platforms. This was the first time I used Docker or used Docker images. For starters, I'm using Docker Desktop and GDExtension for VS Code. I use the Docker images from GitHub called Godot containers. There isn't much information on setting up the Godot containers, but basically what they do is set up an environment for building Godot for all the main platforms. If you want to try setting up your own Docker containers, and you are also on Windows, I think the Linux one was pretty easy to set up and work with. I ran into some errors when I finally got to building my extension, since the Linux C++ compiler was a little bit more strict than Visual Studio, but they were easy to fix. The Mac container was harder to set up and takes a lot more time. There's a very helpful YouTube video called Cross-Compile GDExtension with Build Containers by Ben Jamison, which demonstrates the correct way to build these containers, and it was helpful to me. If you only plan on building for your own OS, you can avoid the whole rigmarole of building Docker containers. I mostly did it because I hope others use the add-ons I made. Overall, I think C++ via GDExtension is probably too cumbersome compared to GDScript to ever replace GDScript. Also, if performance is a concern, you can stick with C#, which has a lot more learning resources out there. I had previous experience using C++ before going into GDExtension, but if you're completely new to C++, trying to learn through making a GDExtension is probably going to be tough, since there aren't many learning resources as with GDScript or C#. I think there is a general expectation that you know the basics of C++ before using it in Godot. With that said, I suppose I could recommend the Cherno's C++ tutorial videos if you need the basics, or any other tutorial video series on C++. However, I think Godot has the potential to be a great starting place for learning C++ for game programming. I think in comparison to Unreal Engine, the most obvious big game engine where you write code in C++, there are a couple advantages to using Godot. The first advantage is that Godot is smaller. If you download UE5, you must have 100 plus gigabytes of space available. Secondly, Godot seems to compile a lot faster too, which is helpful for quickly iterating on ideas. In the time I briefly tried C++ and Unreal, compile times were the biggest annoyance I had. Thirdly, there are many similarities between writing C++ for Godot and for Unreal, which should make the skill transferable if you ever wanted to switch later on. Both Unreal and Godot come with their own macros, both implement basic data structures that are easier to work with in the standard template library, and both have some form of automated memory management. I want to highlight the Godot docs, in particular the engine development, engine core, and modules section for further reading material for those interested in taking the plunge. And that's about all. I hope I was able to convince someone to give GDExtension a try, or I at least piqued your curiosity.